look, if you're a doctor, a lawyer, attorney, you're making huge amounts of money, you have to really, really believe that tax rates down the road are going to be dramatically higher than they are today. My message is really for Main Street America. If you're in the 22 or 24% tax bracket, that's where this message really resonates, and that's what I tell people to focus on.
To make a move like that, you have to have kahunas and conviction.
Long term, I'm bullish. We could see about a 20% correction next year.
And this is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Don't touch that dial. Hi, everybody. This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback, and we have best-selling author David McKnight joining us to tell us how he is navigating the current market volatility with more conservative products, as well as how to get into a lower tax bracket now and in retirement. But first, for our listeners who are joining us live on Clubhouse and on the iHeartRadio network, tell us about your background.
I started in this industry in 1997, so I've been doing this for about 25 years. I wrote a book called The Power Zero back in 2014. I self-published it, threw it out on Amazon, crossed my fingers and hoped for the best. And people started to buy the book. It's since gotten picked up by Penguin Random House. It sold about 350,000 copies and a couple of other sequels and a documentary. And so now I spend a lot of my time talking about the reality that tax rates in our future, even in the next 10 years, are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today. And unfortunately, most America are stuck in the tax deferred paradigm. They, convention says you get a deduction during your working years. You postpone the payment of that tax till somewhere down the road because you're going to be in a lower tax bracket in retirement. But that whole paradigm is being turned on its ear. We now know that we're at historically low tax rates. Tax rates have really never been this low. And most experts agree that even in the next 10 years, tax rates are going to have to rise dramatically. Some have even said tax rates have to double just to keep our country out of the poorhouse. And so I know this is a message, Josh, that you've embraced. It's a message I've been preaching about for a really long time, and I'm happy to share it with your listeners today.
Something that's on the minds of any listener or viewer on our live YouTube right now is, what are your thoughts on the current state of the economy and how it's affecting the markets?
Yeah, I take, Josh, more of I try not to get too impressed by any short-term volatility. What I look at really is what's happening in the mid to long term. And what I'm seeing is a rising interest rate environment. And I'm seeing a scenario where the cost of servicing the national debt is going to rise as interest rates rise. A lot of people think the national debt is a 30-year loan that we've given to China or whatever, or taken from China. But these are bonds that get renewed every 2 years, and we will have to refinance all of this debt soon, and we'll have to do it at higher interest rates, and that's going to consume an increasingly large portion of the federal budget. Will soon get to the point where just the cost of servicing this $30 trillion of debt and growing is going to consume the entire federal budget. And that has implications just all across the board. It's going to have implications for the stock market. It's going to have implications for, employment. It's going to have implications for inflation. These are repercussions that are going to just, in fact, there's a guy by the name of Brian Beaulieu. He wrote a book called Prosperity in the Age of Decline. He says all of these different financial elements are going to converge in this perfect storm in 2030. So I, frankly, Josh, worry less about what's going on right now, more about where we're heading in 2030, and try to get your house in order before then, because there's something very, very interesting that's coming down the pipe.
So what's going on in 2030? I want to get to that. But I think what's great about having you on, as people are really unnerved by the stock market, is a lot of the recipes that you talk about in your book, The Power of Zero, have nothing to do with the stock market. So a good tip that I would glean from your work is kind of focus on what you can control, not what you can't.
I read somewhere recently that the stock market is down 20 to 30% of the time, and it's up 70 to 80% of the time. So the cost of being able to experience the ups of the market 70 to 80% of the time is the cost of having to have the market go down 20 to 30% of the time. So if you want to be able to experience the 70 to 80% of the time that the stock market is going up, you have to also be willing to experience the 20 to 30% the market is going down. That's sort of the cost of admission. And so for me, it's really, really tough to time when to get into the market, at time when to get out of the market. So I tend to adopt an approach where I'm going to take my lumps when the market's down, but you have to sort of stay the course. We know we're in a rising interest rate environment, which means that a lot of these products, whether they're what I refer to in my book, The Power of Zero, the LIRP, the Life Insurance Retirement Plan, or some of these fixed index annuities are very interest rate sensitive. As interest rates go up, this becomes a very safe and productive way to grow at least a portion of our portfolios. If you can grow your money and get 6 or 7% without taking any more risk than what you're accustomed to taking in a savings account, that's a pretty safe and productive way to grow at least a portion of your retirement plan. So when you can get greater return with lower standard deviation than you might in a bond portfolio, then that's a pretty good option when it comes to at least a portion of your investment. But I think you got to stay the course when it comes to the equity portion of your portfolio.
But I think a lot of what you're focusing on is stuff that you can control, where you tax locate. So talk about tax location. First, define what it is for people who don't understand what it is, and then how can people take advantage of that?
You bet. So I talk about in my book, The Power of Zero, that there's 3 basic types of investments. I mean, there's millions of different places that you can invest money, but there's 3 basic types of investment accounts. And I refer to those accounts in terms of buckets of money. You've got the taxable bucket, which is, every year you get a 1099 from the financial institution that says, hey, your money grew this much. Now you got to give a portion of it back to the IRS in the form of taxes. These are great emergency funds, but we should never have more than 6 months of basic living expenses, unless we're saving for a wedding or a vacation, what have you. But the locus of where most people have the lion's share of their retirement savings is what I call the tax deferred bucket. And these are your 401ks and your IRAs. You get a deduction on the front end and you postpone the payment of those taxes till some point much further down the road. And it's really been my mission, Josh, to help raise awareness that we are at a period in time where tax rates are historically low. Experts agree that tax rates even in 2030 will be dramatically higher than they are today. So we have to be very, very thoughtful about how we contribute dollars to these types of accounts. In fact, I've even made the case in my books that in a rising tax rate environment, there's a mathematically perfect amount of money to have in your tax deferred bucket. You want to keep that balance low enough that by the time you reach retirement and the IRS starts to force you to take money out, that those required minimum distributions are going to be equal to or less than your standard deduction in retirement. That way, the money you come out of there, that you're taking out of there by way of those RMDs, are tax-free. And then anything that is really above and beyond the ideal balances in those first 2 buckets should be systematically repositioned to the tax-free bucket. You want to do the shifting to tax-free slowly enough that you don't rise up into a tax bracket that gives you heartburn, but you want to do it quickly enough that you don't, that you get all the heavy lifting done before tax rates go up for good.
Let's talk about the impact of rising taxes. You talk about on your website how in 3 years, 7 months, and 26 days, taxes could go up. What do you mean by that?
Well, so at the end of 2017, Congress passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And what that did was through budget reconciliation, it temporarily lowered tax rates just across the board. Every American got a tax cut. The rub there is that tax cut had an expiration date. When you do budget reconciliation, you can only get a simple majority. You don't get a filibuster-proof 60 votes. It expires in 8 years. And so we know the year and the day when tax rates will go up. And Congress doesn't even have to vote on it. All Congress has to do is nothing. And frankly, Josh, Congress is pretty good at doing nothing. So come January 1st, 2026, tax rates are going to revert back to what they were in 2017. And what that means is that we now have this 4-year period of time, 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025, a 4-year period of time during which to take advantage of historically low tax rates to get our highly taxable 401ks and IRAs repositioned to tax-free. And frankly, every year that goes by where we fail to take advantage of historically low tax rates is potentially a year beyond 2026, when we could be forced to pay the highest tax rates we're likely to see in our lifetime. So we've got windows of opportunity that are slamming shut with each passing year. So I just trying to raise awareness that so that people can recognize that we are at historically low tax rates, but these historically low tax rates are not going to be here for long.
So how do we take advantage of these lower rates? What are some steps our listeners can take today? But I guess before we get to the how, just go over the problem once more. That 2030 date is kind of ringing in my ear. What's going on in 2030?
You got to sort of ask yourself what's driving all of this debt. What's driving all of the debt is that the federal government has promised way more than it can afford to deliver and what's called non-discretionary spending programs. A non-discretionary spending program is a program that the federal government is required to pay for by law. They can't get out of it. They don't have any control over it unless they change it through an act of Congress. And what am I talking about here? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the national debt. Those 4 things are non-discretionary items in the budget. And they're those first 3, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, are all linked to inflation. They have to go up with inflation by law. And so unless Congress passes a law that makes these 3 programs sustainable, meaning that we can actually afford them without having to borrow money from China to be able to pull it off. If they can't do that, every year that goes by where they fail to fix it and to shore up these programs, the national debt will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's all going to come to a head in 2030, where you'll have so many baby boomers who have moved out of the workforce onto the rolls of the entitlement program. The debt will have gotten so big, interest rates will have risen so high that the cost of servicing that augmented amount of debt will consume nearly the entire federal budget. Tax rates will have to rise dramatically to be able to compensate for that. The stock market's going to take a hit. So if you think of that perfect storm, all of those unsustainable fiscal trajectories all sort of converging in 1 year, that's 2030. And that's when our entire financial system is going to convulse. Some people are predicting a depression that could last a couple of years. But the point is, we're on a very financially unstable fiscal path. And a lot of people, we sort of have this Pollyanna-ish view of the world when lurking behind the scenes is this fiscal threat that could upend the economy and our 401ks and IRAs, and certainly culminate in higher taxes.
So we talked about the problem, the fiscal deficit, the fiscal cliff. You were a part of a movie. We have a mutual friend, Barry Dyke, who told me about this movie. What's up with this new movie? You're now a movie star.
Well, so a lot of people confuse the new movie with the old one I did. It's the same director. I did a movie back in 2018 called The Power Zero, The Tax Train is Coming. There's a new one by the same director called The Baby Boomer Dilemma, which talks about once you hit retirement, how the rules of the game change in terms of how you draw income. It's no longer about, asset balances. It's more about income. So the rules of the game change in retirement, and a lot of people fail to transition to that new set of rules. And so that's a new movie by the same director, Doug Orchard. But the movie that I actually starred in, right, back in the day, 2018, was called The Power Zero, The Tax Train is Coming.
It's funny, yeah. But you were in the Baby Boomer Dilemma, weren't you?
No, they asked me to be in it, but it's really what they were talking about was really not my my sweet spot, so I didn't want to detract from the experts. But it was a great movie. I loved it. Doug did a great job with that movie.
Okay, because I think I may have heard the same thing from Barry Dyke too. Like it was very, he had like a brief clip. So describe that now, listeners. What is the baby boomer dilemma as you see it, not as necessarily the film?
The baby boomer dilemma for me is, so it's a different dilemma than what Doug talks about in this movie. The real dilemma to me is, do you pay your taxes now or do you pay your taxes later? Do you preemptively pay the taxes on your IRAs and 401ks before the IRS absolutely requires it of you? Or do you postpone the payment of those taxes till some point further down the road when the IRS demands that you take those distributions and you pay the tax at whatever the tax rates happen to be in the year you take those dollars out? I liken that a little bit like unto a going into a business partnership with the IRS, and every year the IRS gets to vote on what percentage of your profits that they get to keep. So for example, if you had $1 million in your IRA today, it's hard to really know how much money you have unless you can accurately predict what tax rates are going to be down the road when you'll be taking those dollars out. And so when you're marching into a future where tax rates are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today, then you really have to ask yourself this question. Are you willing to pay a tax today before the IRS requires it of you, knowing that tax rates, according to all the experts, are likely to be higher down the road, even if it doesn't feel good? I tell people all the time, I give you permission to not enjoy it. All you have to do to make this decision is acknowledge that even if tax rates down the road are even 1% higher than they are today, then mathematically that decision will push you much further ahead than you would otherwise be.
So mathematically, let's go through some of the math of this decision-making process. Because if somebody has that hypothetical $1 million in their IRA, they obviously don't Roth the whole thing all at once. Just kind of a basic primer, if you will. I know your Power Zero does a great job.
This is what I tell people. You obviously don't want to do it all at once. Imagine the U.S. tax system like that graduated cylinder from chemistry class, long skinny cylinder with the red lines on it. When you experience income, whether from your work or through a Roth conversion, that money goes into that cylinder, flows all the way down to the bottom. Some of your money gets taxed at 10, some at 12, some at 22, some at 24, some at 32, some at 35, and some at 37. If you were to convert that entire $1 million IRA all in 1 year, that would flow into your tax cylinder, land right on top of all your other earned income. Most of it would be taxed at your highest marginal tax bracket. So in an effort to avoid a doubling of taxes over time, what'd you do? You doubled your tax rate in the short term. That's not very smart. So what we want to do is we want to stretch that tax obligation out over as many years as makes good financial sense. So what I tell people is you want to shift the money to your tax-free bucket slowly enough that you don't rise into a tax bracket that gives you heartburn, and quickly enough that you get all the heavy lifting done before tax rates go up for good. And so I get people to focus. Most people that walk into my office every day, Josh, are in the 22 or 24% tax bracket. That's really the sweet spot of this tax code. 22% tax bracket goes up to like 175 or so thousand, but the 24% tax bracket is only 2% more, and you can go all the way up to $340,100. So what does that mean? You could get an extra $165,000 shifted to the tax-free bucket each and every year, and it only costs you 2% more. And guess what? That 24% tax bracket is still lower than the future equivalent of the 22% tax bracket, which is 25. So I tell people you should really be jumping on this window of opportunity, because when 2026 rolls around, that 22 becomes 25, the 24 becomes 28, and you will have missed out on that opportunity. What we don't want to do, and we talk about the tax brackets that give us heartburn, it jumps from 24 to 32. I tell people you don't necessarily need to bump up into the 32% tax bracket in the short term. Get those 24% tax brackets maxed out each and every year if you feel like that makes sense. And then if you have to pay a little bit into the 28 starting in 2026 and beyond, not a big deal, but we don't want to bump up into the 32 or the future equivalent of that 32.
You mentioned bracket filling, which is kind of get up to that 24% bracket. I will ask a question. What if you're above the 24 bracket? What do you do then? Like, what if you're making a
Yeah, so
lot of
that's a
money
good
and you're in
question.
the 37% bracket?
So I had somebody ask me this the other day. They said, look, I'm in the top marginal tax bracket, that's 37%. I live in California, so I'm paying another 13% state tax. So they're looking at 50% tax. If they're paying the Obamacare surcharge, that's another 3.8, so that's 53.8. And they're saying they're going to be in a lower tax bracket in retirement because maybe their income's only $100,000. Look, I identify with that. I get it. I feel your pain. And it may not necessarily make sense to forego a 50% tax deduction today if you think you're only going to be spending $100,000 in retirement. That's why I tell people all the time, look, if you're a doctor, a lawyer, attorney, you're making huge amounts of money, you have to really, really believe that tax rates down the road are going to be dramatically higher than they are today. My message is really for Main Street America, if you're in the 22 or 24% tax bracket, that's where this message really resonates, and that's what I tell people to focus on.
And my reading of your books would be, if you're above the 24, focus on the LERPs, focus on the life insurance retirement planning. Because let's say, so when I get somebody's worth a significant amount or higher income than that 24 bracket, max out your 401k, consider a defined benefit pension plan, sock away 100 to 300 tax deferred, and then add to that your LERPs. Add to that, so your taxable money, make sure that you don't pay tax on money you're not spending. So for example, own your dividend paying stock within an IRA, not in the taxable brokerage accounts. So consider allowing yourself more options, because you may not be in a high tax bracket forever. Although ideally, if you're making $500,000 a year, if you save a certain amount, you'll probably always be in the high tax bracket. But make sure then, let's say you're working in New York, New Jersey, California, Illinois, high tax state, consider even, domicile change when you retire. So you could be at a 50 bracket now, maybe a 37, you move to Florida, or I know you're in Puerto Rico, and you can actually structure things for 20 years out, for 10 years out, to keep your options open. So I think a lot of your work in terms of LERPs, and I want to get into LERPs because a lot of people don't understand them. They don't know. They might hear their advisor or their broker say, or their life insurance person say, put money in life insurance, but they don't know how to fund it. They don't know how to properly structure it. We'll talk about that. But first, we're going to go to the phone lines, and we have Meech with a question. Go ahead, Meech.
So I'm someone who has just now two jobs, and I wanted to figure out about withholding. They give you a spreadsheet that says for multiple jobs, if you're filing either single or married jointly, here is a spreadsheet for where you can put to additionally withhold X amount. My question is that something that's needed to be done so that come tax time, you're not owing? Because I'm the type of person, I'd rather you take out more up front and I get paid back during tax season as opposed to the other way around.
Well, of course, this is a tough one, because if you end up owing money, then you owe interest and penalties, right? And if you end up getting a refund, then you gave the federal government an interest-free loan for a year. It's sort of funny how if you pay them too much, they just give it back to you, no interest paid. But if you don't give them enough, then there's all sorts of deleterious consequences. So the perfect tax refund is zero. You neither owe nor are getting a refund, but that's sort of hard to do. And so, I commiserate, because you definitely don't want to be in a position where you owe at the end of the day, and you're better off getting a little bit of a refund. So I would say if you're going to have to err on one side or the other, you're going to want to err on getting the refund, but you just want that refund to be as small as possible.
Let's talk about the big picture here, how to get to the zero bracket. So one way is to fill up that 24% bracket. But where does the money go to? And as that end game comes with the zero bracket, one of the biggest things you're clear on is, so when you're retired, how do you get in that zero bracket? So you have enough in Roths, enough in LERPs, which we'll get into LERPs, cash value insurance, maybe enough in stocks that don't pay a dividend to trigger income taxation. What other kind of places where we can look, and maybe that's all there is. So consider Roths, consider life insurance, which we'll get. I'll have a whole segment on that later. Consider stocks that don't pay dividend. A lot of people forget that one. That's why Warren Buffett has Berkshire Hathaway, so he can control when he takes taxes, when he pays the tax. What other things should our listeners consider and viewers?
Yeah, it's funny, Josh. A lot of people say, well, if I'm in the 0% tax bracket, I'm going to be poor. I'm not going to have any money. Of course, with a little bit of planning, the opposite can actually be true. So what I talk about in my books is a strategy. It's a balanced, comprehensive strategy that calls for multiple streams of tax-free income, none of which show up on the IRS's radar, but all of which contribute to you being in the 0% tax bracket. So,
repeat that. You're always good with these like one sentences. I think that's your best like contribution. Sometimes I'll hear a sentence and they're so weighty. So just repeat that real quick.
Okay, so I believe in a comprehensive, balanced strategy to tax-free retirement planning that calls for multiple streams of tax-free income, none of which show up on the IRS's radar, but all of which contribute to you being in the zero tax bracket. We want to take advantage of every nook and cranny in the IRS tax code. And every single one of those investments that I'm about to talk about has unique attributes that make it different than all the other ones, that make it a unique part of the puzzle that can bring that 0% tax bracket, 0% puzzle into focus. And I'll give you an example. I believe in the Roth IRA, the Roth 401k, the Roth Conversion. And if by doing the Roth Conversion, you can get your balance in your tax deferred bucket low enough, then your RMDs will be tax free. I believe that the LIRP has a very unique position in the plan. And I also believe that if you can keep your provisional income low enough, which is the income the IRS tracks to determine if they're going to tax your Social Security, you can keep that low enough, then your Social Security is going to be tax free as well. So I just named 6 different streams of tax-free income. I think that counts up 6.
So repeat the 6 again. Again, I think so much of what you say is weighty. So just repeat it. You got to be like Donald Trump, David. You got to repeat things 3 times for me to get it. So go ahead.
All right. So I'm going to repeat each one, and I'm going to tell you what makes each one unique.
Sure.
Roth IRA.
Bingo.
Roth IRAs are unique because you get instant liquidity. You put the money in, you can take it right back out. I don't recommend that you do, because if you take it out and the window passes, you can't put it back in. So that makes Roth IRAs unique. If you're over age 50, you can put in $7,000 for you, $7,000 for your spouse. I really like the Roth 401k because the Roth 401k, you can get free money from your company. That gives you a 100, if you get a dollar for dollar match, up to 5%, you put in the 5%, you get 100% in return on your contribution that first year. So none of the other tax-free streams of income give you free money like that. I love the Roth Conversion because the Roth Conversion has no limits. If you had $1 billion in your IRA, you could convert every last dime of it to a Roth IRA with no problem. In fact, I could probably make the case that that's something you should absolutely do this year. I did a podcast on why Mitt Romney needs to convert his $100 million IRA to a Roth starting right now. I talk about the RMDs. Those are great because when you put money into your IRA, you got a deduction on the front end, right? It grew tax deferred. And then when you use your standard deduction to offset your RMD on the back end, then it comes out tax free. I call that the holy grail of financial planning. You got a deduction on the front end, you grew it tax deferred, you took it out tax free. I love the LIRP because it's, the life insurance retirement plan. It grows tax-free like all those other accounts, but it has a death benefit component that doubles as long-term care. They will give you your death benefit if you can no longer perform 2 of 6 activities of daily living. They will give you your death benefit while you're alive for the purpose of paying for long-term care. None of the other streams of tax-free income can do that. And it also grows safely and productively. And the last one is Social Security. If you can keep your provisional income thresholds low enough, your Social Security will be tax-free. That's great because Social Security, tax-free Social Security, the longer you live, the better it gets. The longer you live, the greater the return on your investment. And it helps insulate against longevity risk. It can help insulate against long-term care risk. It can help insulate against sequence of return risk. Social Security with that cost of living adjustment lasts as long as you do, as long as you're on this side of the grass. So those are 6 streams of tax-free income. They're all important because they all do different things. But when you put them together, it's like a puzzle and they all fit together. And that's when the 0% tax bracket comes into focus.
Wow, fantastic. So I'm going to try to memorize this. Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversions, LERPs, IRAs up to the standard deduction amount, and then Social Security.
You got it.
So I get an A. I get an A on the exam.
6 for 6.
And then you could add 7, you could have health savings accounts. And 8, you could have, so we asked the question, well, what if you're above the 24% bracket? Just thinking like David McKnight, I would say, allows you, if you're in a higher income, to say, you know what? Instead of having money grow too much in cash or grow too much money over here, I'm going to build some of these 6 or 7 tax-free streams, because maybe I won't be in a 0 bracket when I'm 70, but maybe I could get to a 20% or a 24%. So I think it's great, very great wisdom. Now, somebody had a question of, what is your book again? What is your latest book, David? You're always writing. I know you wrote some sci-fi thriller or something.
Yeah, my latest book is being shopped around to different publishers. It's called The Infinity Code, and it's basically it's like a Dan Brown type thriller. It's built around, all of Dan Brown's books are built around some sort of controversial topic. Mine's built around the idea of modern monetary theory, and it's about 20 or so Harvard graduates who graduated in 1985 and decided that they were going to lie in wait until one of them could rise to the office of presidency, so they could then foist modern monetary theory upon the country. And this idea that you can print unlimited amounts of money to accomplish your social agenda or whatever your agenda happens to be. And so there's a Harvard sophomore who becomes aware of this plot and has to try to foil it before Election Day. So it's one of my favorite books I've written, and we're just waiting to figure out which publisher is going to publish it.
Wonderful. So folks, but from a financial perspective, the top 3, according to me, what is your favorite financial book that you've written? Or are they all like children, so you love them all the same?
I really like The Volatility Shield. I was particularly proud of that book because I love M. Night Shyamalan twist endings like The Sixth Sense or Signs. It's got this great twist ending, but it's also got a great financial message that's couched in the plot. And I get most consistently positive feedback on that book. But it's different strokes for different folks.
So folks, you get your choice. If you're more of a thriller type of, if you like a story as a way to communicate financial ideas, maybe you're more of a visual learner, the Volatility Shield is the book for you. Where do you prefer that people buy your book if they don't want the free book by calling us at 888-988-JOSH? Do you prefer them buying at davidmcknight.com or Amazon, or is there no?
No, just if they want to buy it in bulk, which I can't imagine they would, it's davidmcknightbooks.com. But the best place. Well,
no, we have a lot of financial advisors who listen.
Okay, yeah, so you can get it in bulk. You can mix and match titles at davidmcknightbooks.com. But if you just want to buy one, the best place to go is to Jeff Bezos over at Amazon.
Okay. So, and also look before you LERP. So the 4 best books from a financial perspective, we got this other thriller and wait on modern monetary theory. You got Look Before You LERP, Tax-Free Income for Life, The Volatility Shield, and The Power of Zero. So I've noticed TikTok. Have you gotten on TikTok lately? We got to do some TikTok videos. Everybody's talking about life insurance in some version, and generally they're sort of misleading. So I love your book, Look Before You LERP, but talk about how to properly, first off, why should people consider life insurance? Because you have the Dave Ramseys of the world and the Susie Ormans who say it's a bad idea. First, why should it be considered? And then
let me just throw this out there. Next Wednesday, I've got a podcast coming out on YouTube. If people want to check it out on the Power of Zero channel, I've got a podcast coming out on the truth about Dave Ramsey.
Ooh.
Dave Ramsey, of course, is the thorn in the side of anybody who who even has the word, the word life insurance retirement plan fall out of their mouth. I will say this: the life insurance retirement plan by a lot of those guys on TikTok, they're talking about it as the the silver bullet, the panacea, the Swiss Army knife of financial instruments. I tend to not look at it that way. I tend to look at it as simply a complement to those other 5 streams of tax-free income that we talked about. So you just have to be careful who you're talking to when it comes to these LIRPs, because if you're talking to someone and you get the feeling that they think that it's the second coming of the greatest financial instrument you've ever seen to the exclusion of everything else, I would take a step back and take a pause and maybe look at some of my other books, and you'll see that it should really be incorporated in a balanced and comprehensive way. If somebody's coming at you like it's the end all be all, then that means that they probably have a real huge financial motivation for selling it to you. But the LIRP has to be considered within the context of all of these other streams of tax-free income, because it does do something that none of these other things do. It gives you a death benefit that doubles as long-term care. Yes, it can grow tax-free. There's no limits on how much you put in. There's no income limitations. But it does something different, and we got to acknowledge the things that make it different and the things that make it unique and why it's a great complement to all these other investments.
And also waiver of premium. A lot of people, I was just with somebody, 44 today, found out she had breast cancer, and we're applying for waiver of premium so that when she doesn't have income, your 401k doesn't do that. Your Roth IRA does not put a contribution in if you get disabled. That's what we call self-completing. So it's a powerful tool. So Dave Ramsey, you know what? It's funny. We were on the same radio station on New York's WR, our flagship, and I had challenged him. I said, "Come out, Dave. I'll fight you by the willow tree," and he never showed up. And I'm a little old me. I did meet him once at the WR headquarters. He was a very nice man. He was very charming, actually. Wasn't as because on the radio he's more gruff sometimes, but he was actually very nice to me and gracious. So I'll give him that. But I challenged him to a duel. It was funny. His old number 2, Chris Hogan, came on to promote his book, but Dave never came on. And I wonder if it got word. I would do whole shows sort of against him. So I guess I don't blame him. But I would have been very charitable if he came on and we could just duke it out. The problem, I think, is they mischaracterize life insurance from maybe these YouTube or TikTok people who are making life insurance the be-all, end-all. And it's not. It is a critical component of a plan, but it's a component, not the component. I have a mentor who said life insurance is like the turbocharger of the engine. Your engine is your ability to earn income at your job. It's your ability to earn gains in the stock market, but you need a turbocharger too. And the life insurance is the turbocharger. I thought that was a good analogy for what life insurance is to a plan. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I think that falls right in line with what I was saying, that it's not the cake, it's maybe the icing on the cake or the cherry on the cake, and it just does. We just need to acknowledge what each of the outstanding qualities of each of these things are, and the minute we come across, to one of our clients that life insurance is going to solve more than it really can, I think we're not doing our clients the service that we should. And so I think we just need to acknowledge that the LIRP has a lot of outstanding qualities, but it's not going to solve every one of your problems. It will be a great complement to all of the other tax-free streams of income that you have. And that's why I say I believe in having multiple streams of tax-free income, none of which show up on the IRS's radar, but all of which contribute to you being in the 0% tax bracket.
Well, this was great. And parting thoughts, parting financial tips for our listeners.
Probably the same as every time I'm on your show. And this is really my wheelhouse that I'm really trying to bring to everyone's attention. Every year matters. Every year that goes by where you fail to take advantage of historically low tax rates is potentially a year down the road when you could be forced to pay taxes at much higher rates. And that means your money's going to run out faster than you thought. So this has real world applications. It can determine whether you're going to run out of money before you run out of life or not. And so tax rates are historically low. If you don't believe that tax rates are historically low, or you don't believe that tax rates down the road are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today, then educate yourself. Watch The Power Zero, The Tax Train is Coming. Read some of my books. See what these third-party experts, Ed Slott, David Walker, Larry Kotlikoff, see what these folks are saying about the future of tax rates, and then make a good, prudent decision accordingly.
Wonderful interview, David McKnight. Want to thank you for joining us. And folks, you can get his books wherever books are sold. Amazon, just search for David McKnight. And we just want to thank you for another fascinating interview. Great.
Thanks, Josh. It's been a pleasure as always.
Wonderful. Take care, David.